There are stories buried so deep in the Arctic that even the wind refuses to carry them. Stories about nights that lasted too long, and footsteps that didn't belong to anything alive. Most of them are legends, shaped by fear, softened by time. But not this one. What happened in the winter of 1953 was written down. Not to warn anyone, not to explain anything, but simply because the survivor could not bear to keep it inside his mind. Words describing something the Inuit had spoken of for centuries. A creature that hunts only those who walk alone. They called it the Amarok. A wolf as tall as a man. Born from darkness. Bound to the endless winter. And hungry for solitude, not flesh. Tonight I will tell you what happened to the expedition that went looking for answers. In a place where answers were never meant to be found. This is their story. And if you hear breathing in the pauses between my words, don't worry. The Amarok does not hunt those who listen. Only those who wander. Far in the northern Arctic, past the last sleeping towns and the last man-made road, there is a stretch of land where winter feels alive. It is a place where the cold doesn't just touch you. It watches you. Where the wind carries a strange, heavy silence, as if it's holding back a secret it can't quite say out loud. In the winter of 1953, the darkness arrived earlier than anyone expected. Not gently, not slowly, but all at once. One day the sky was a dull blue, and the next it had slipped into a deep, endless night. The elders in the nearby settlement noticed the change immediately. They said the air felt wrong. They said the storms were moving too quickly, as if they were being pushed by something unseen. And they called it a hungry winter, a winter that comes for those who don't respect the land. By the time the research team arrived, daylight was already fading into a faint purple glow that lasted only a few minutes each day. The cold was sharp and heavy, the kind that makes every breath sting, the kind that feels almost personal. And beneath the snow, far below the frozen ground, something old shifted. Not with anger. Not with impatience. But with awareness. The locals refused to guide the team past the edge of their settlement. They offered no argument, no negotiation. Only a single warning, spoken with quiet fear. Do not walk alone. Not even for a moment. The Amarok watches the ones who wander. The researchers wrote the warning down in their journals, then closed the books as if the words meant nothing. They believed they were entering an empty land, a place ruled only by weather and silence. But the Arctic is never empty. And its silence is never just silence. It remembers. And it listens. The team set out the next morning, stepping past the last lamps of the settlement and into the wide, frozen dark. The air felt heavier there. Thicker. As if the land itself didn't want them crossing its threshold. Snow stretched out in every direction. Unbroken and untouched. Glowing faintly under the weak northern light. There were no animals. No tracks. Not even the distant call of a raven. "It's too quiet," one of the men said, trying to laugh as he spoke. But the sound died quickly, swallowed by the cold. A few hours into their walk, they found the first sign that something was wrong. A single footprint. At first they thought it belonged to a wolf, until they stepped closer. It was far too large. Nearly the size of a man's torso, pressed deep into the snow, as if whatever made it carried a tremendous weight. And there was only one. No trail. No second print. Nothing leading to it, nothing leading away. Just one impossibly large mark in the middle of an empty white field. The men stood around it in silence. Not because they believed the old stories, but because something about the sight felt wrong in a way they couldn't explain. Snow drifted over the edges of the print, as if the land was trying to erase it quickly, before they asked too many questions. The leader of the group knelt down and brushed away the loose flakes. He touched the bottom of the print. "It's warm," he whispered. A cold wind swept across the field, sharp enough to sting their faces. And one of the men turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. "We're being watched." No one answered him. But each of them felt it, that strange, pressing awareness. That quiet weight in the air, as if something just beyond sight was waiting for them to move. They kept walking, leaving the giant footprint behind. But the feeling did not leave them. It followed. Sometimes close, sometimes distant. Always there. By the time the team decided to make camp, the faint glow of daylight had already slipped away. In the Arctic winter, dusk doesn't fade gently. It drops. One minute the world is a pale violet haze, and the next it is swallowed by a darkness so deep it feels almost physical. They set up their tents close together, trying to keep the cold at bay. The wind had died completely, leaving the air unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that makes every small sound ring a little too loud. As they worked, one of the men paused and looked over his shoulder. "Do you hear that?" The others stopped and listened. Nothing. Only the quiet scrape of their own breath. They built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth, and sat around it as their food thawed slowly in their hands. The flames flickered weakly, fighting against the surrounding dark, and every few seconds the light seemed to bend strangely, leaning away from the tree line, as if something there was drawing the heat out of it. One of them suggested, "We should mark our perimeter." So they walked the circle around their camp, lanterns in hand, pushing their light into the dark. Each lantern revealed nothing more than shifting snow, and the long shadows of pines that creaked softly in the cold. But when they returned to the fire, the youngest member of the team stopped suddenly. "Hold on. Where's my pack?" They looked around, checking the snow. It had been right beside the tents minutes earlier. Now it was gone. They searched, calling out, stepping into the dark. But the snow around them remained untouched, smooth, perfect, with no sign of anything being dragged or carried away. It was as if the pack had simply vanished. Maybe the wind took it, someone offered, but even he didn't believe it. There was no wind. The air was so still it felt held in place by something unseen. They eventually found the pack at the edge of the trees. Not torn. Not disturbed. Just sitting upright, as if someone had placed it there carefully. The team exchanged uneasy glances. No one said it, but every one of them felt the same cold truth rising in their thoughts. Someone, or something, had been close enough to their camp to take the pack and set it down again, without making a sound. As the fire crackled softly, the leader finally spoke. "We stay together. No one wanders. Not for any reason." The men nodded, though their eyes kept drifting toward the darkness between the trees. And as night settled fully over the camp, a low sound drifted across the snow. Not a howl. Not a growl. Something in between. A long, steady breath from something larger than any wolf, and much closer than they wanted to believe. That night, the darkness felt heavier than before. It pressed against the tents like a living thing, settling into every seam and fold of the fabric. The men tried to sleep, but the quiet was too deep, too absolute. The kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound loud in your ears. It was close to midnight when the first sound came. A single, heavy thud in the snow. Not far away. Not near the fire. Right beside one of the tents. The man inside froze. His breath hitched, and for a moment he wondered if it had been his imagination. Just the shifting of the cold canvas or the settling ice. But then came another. A slow, deliberate step. And another. Soft, but too heavy to belong to any ordinary animal. The sound circled the tents in a careful arc, as if whatever moved out there was studying the layout of their camp. Mapping it. The men didn't speak. They barely breathed. Lantern light bled through the thin fabric, shaking gently in the cold. And every few seconds, the glow dimmed. Not flickering. Not blowing in the wind. But sinking slowly. As if something large had passed in front of it. One of the men, the youngest, reached silently for his rifle. His hands trembled as he lifted it, though he didn't dare unzip the tent. Outside, the steps continued. One slow circle. Then another. Each footfall was spaced too far apart to be human, yet too controlled to be a bear. At one point, the steps stopped completely, right beside the leader's tent. He felt the presence before he heard anything else. A cold weight, like standing in the shadow of a tall building. Except nothing in that empty Arctic could cast a shadow at night. He waited, eyes open in the dark, barely breathing. And then, through the thin wall of canvas, he heard a long, slow exhale. Not the quick, steaming breath of a wolf. Not the uneven panting of a bear. This was different. Deep. Heavy. Almost human in its rhythm. But the size of it, the force of the air behind that breath, made every hair on his arms stand upright. No one moved until dawn. And when the light finally returned, faint and pale over the snow, they stepped outside to examine the ground. There were no footprints. Not a single mark. The snow was smooth, untouched, as if nothing had walked there at all. But the men knew better. They had heard it. Something had circled their camp. Something large. Something that breathed like a living mountain. And the fact that it left no trace was somehow the most terrifying part. Morning came quietly. A weak, grey light slid across the snow, touching the tents with a cold glow that felt more like moonlight than day. No one spoke as they stepped outside. They were afraid to break the silence. Afraid that sound alone might invite whatever had walked around them in the night. The air was so still it felt wrong. Not peaceful. Just empty. A strange, hollow emptiness that seemed to echo inside their chests. The fire had died during the night, leaving only a soft mound of ash. Their equipment sat where they had left it. The tents were untouched. Everything looked normal. Almost. Where are the perimeter markers? One of the men pointed to the small wooden stakes they had pushed into the snow the night before. Bright orange flags meant to warn them if something crossed into their camp. But the stakes were gone. Not scattered. Not snapped. Gone. The snow around the area was perfectly smooth, with no signs of movement. No drag marks. No footprints. No indentations. As if the markers had simply sunk into the earth without a trace. Impossible, the leader muttered, kneeling down. He brushed his gloves across the surface. The snow was firm. Untouched. Had the stakes been pulled straight up? Lifted carefully and silently? By what? Before anyone could answer, another voice called out. "Over here! Look at this!" They hurried toward the sound and found the youngest member standing at the edge of the clearing, staring down at the snow with wide, pale eyes. At first, they didn't understand what they were seeing. The snow was folded inward. Not melted. Not crushed. But folded. Like a soft blanket pressed down by a heavy shape. And then they saw the outline. A massive paw print. Larger than the one they had found the day before. Wider. Deeper. And this time, the shape was unmistakable. The print of a wolf. A wolf far too big to exist. It was here, someone whispered. But another man shook his head. No, look closer. The edges of the print were starting to rise, slowly filling in as the snow drifted back into place. Like the land was trying, once again, to erase the evidence. The youngest stepped back in fear. Why would it hide its tracks? No one wanted to speak the answer out loud, but they were all thinking it. Only something that understands what tracks mean would bother to hide them. A sudden shout cut the silence. The radio man was pointing to the tree line. To a row of tall pines where something hung from a low branch. They approached slowly, hearts hammering in their chests. It was one of the stakes. One of their bright orange markers. Bent in half. And placed neatly, almost gently, across the lowest branch, far above human reach. Someone, or something, had lifted it up there during the night. Without making a sound. For a long moment, no one spoke. The forest felt closer now. The air heavier. The shadows darker. And in that cold silence, each man felt the same chilling truth settle into his bones. Whatever had walked around their camp had not been curious. It had been testing them, watching how they reacted, learning them. They broke camp quickly, long before the light began to fade. No one said it out loud, but every man felt the same urgency. A quiet pressure in his chest that told him they needed to move. Now. The sky overhead hung low and colorless, as if the day had forgotten to fully arrive. It was morning, but the light was weak and hesitant, clinging to the horizon like a fading memory. "Feels like it's getting darker already," one of the men murmured. The leader checked his watch. It wasn't even noon. Still, the shadows around the trees stretched longer than they should, crawling slowly across the snow as if reaching for them. They walked in tight formation, packs on their shoulders, their eyes drifting constantly to the edges of their vision. The previous night had changed something. The land no longer felt indifferent. It felt aware. After an hour or two, snowfall began. Light at first, then thicker, turning the world into a white haze. The sound of their boots grew muffled, and even their breathing seemed quieter. It was during this stretch, somewhere in the middle of the pale, swirling light, that one of the men, Elias, began to slow down. "Something's following us," he whispered. No one wanted to answer him. "It's been behind us since morning," Elias continued, voice shaking. "I can feel it. Every time I turn around, it stops." The leader placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay close. Don't leave the group." But Elias kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes wide and glassy, as if expecting something to rush out of the snow at any moment. The snowfall thickened again, and the light dimmed as if the sun had taken a step back behind the clouds. "It's too early for this," the radio man muttered. And he was right. Darkness wasn't due for hours. Yet the world around them was sinking into shadow. A slow, creeping dust that slid over the snow like ink. "We need to make shelter," the leader said. "We can't walk blind." They found a narrow ridge where the wind had carved a small hollow in the snow. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from the icy gusts that were beginning to rise. As they set down their packs, Elias spoke again. Softer this time. Almost in a daze. "It's close now." The others froze. "What do you mean?" Elias stared into the white blur beyond the ridge. "I heard it breathe." The wind howled then, swallowing his words. But each man felt a cold ripple of fear move through him. They knew the difference between the wind and a living breath. They knew Elias was not imagining it. The day was dimming fast. Far too fast. And the storm seemed to be gathering into a circle around them. Snow fell in thick sheets now, swirling upward instead of down, as if stirred by something powerful moving just beyond their sight. The leader called everyone closer to the hollow. "We stay together," he said. "No one wanders. No one steps outside this shelter." But the fear in Elias's eyes was different. He wasn't afraid of the storm. He was afraid of something walking behind it. And as the wind roared over the ridge, carrying with it a deep, distant sound, not a cry, not a howl, but something much lower, something almost like a voice. Every man understood the truth they had been avoiding. The dark wasn't falling early. It was being pushed toward them. Night fell faster than the men could prepare for it. One moment there was a faint grey glow behind the clouds, and the next it had sunk into a darkness so complete that even the snow seemed to lose its shape. They lit their lanterns and placed them close together at the center of the hollow, watching the small circles of light tremble in the rising wind. Elias sat with his back against the snow wall, his eyes fixed on the white void beyond the ridge. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. The others tried to keep their voices steady, but everything they said felt small, like words whispered in a cathedral, swallowed by a space far too large to care. As the wind grew stronger, the hollow began to howl, a long, low moan that slid through the snow like a warning. But then, something else joined it. A deeper sound. A slow, dragging vibration that did not belong to the storm. The men stiffened. The leader lifted his head, listening. "That's not the wind," he whispered. And it wasn't. It came again. Louder this time. A heavy, rolling exhale that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Elias shuddered violently. I told you it was close." The lantern flames wavered. The snow around them trembled slightly, as if something massive had stepped somewhere in the dark. "Stay calm," the leader said, though even he couldn't hide the fear in his voice. The breathing came again. Long and ragged, but controlled. Like a hunter trying to stay quiet as it stalked its prey. One of the men clenched his fists. "Where is it?" No one answered. They didn't know. The sound moved through the storm like a ghost. One moment far away. The next right beside them. Then suddenly behind the ridge. Elias pressed his hands to his ears, shaking his head in small, frantic movements. "It knows we're here," he said. The wind howled harder, lifting swirls of snow into the air, turning the world into a spinning, white tunnel. The lanterns buzzed and dimmed, their flames shrinking as if something unseen was drawing the heat from them. And then, out of the storm, out of the darkness so thick it felt like a wall, came a sound that froze the men where they sat. A low, rising growl, deep enough to rattle their bones, long enough to fill the entire hollow, and cold enough that it didn't feel like a sound at all, but a presence. Not the cry of a wolf, not the roar of a bear. Something older, something that had learned patience over a long, long life. The leader swallowed hard. "It's hunting," he whispered. And in that moment, every man in the hollow understood a truth they had been trying not to believe. The Amarok was not passing through the area. It was not wandering. It had been following them since they arrived. And now, in the heart of a rising storm, with night pressed tight against the snow, it was drawing closer. The storm began to settle sometime after midnight, though none of the men dared to sleep. The wind fell into a slow, uneasy whisper, brushing across the hollow like the soft drag of fingers over snow. The lanterns flickered weakly. Their flames had shrunk to thin, trembling lines of orange, offering little warmth and even less comfort. When the breathing faded into silence, the men waited, listening for anything that might give away the creature's distance. But the night remained still. Too still. Eventually, the leader decided they needed answers. "We checked the ridge," he said quietly. "Just the edge. No farther." No one wanted to move. But sitting in the hollow, blind to whatever might be waiting beyond the curve of snow, felt worse. So they rose. Lanterns held out before them and climbed the short slope that shielded their shelter from the open plain. The wind nipped at their faces as they neared the top, carrying a bitter cold that stung their eyes. And then they saw it. A long, deep trench carved through the snow, stretching across the plain like the dragged path of something enormous. It was not the mark of a sled. It was wide. Wider than anything a man or animal could pull. And the snow around it was neatly pressed, as if something heavy had glided across the surface without ever lifting its weight. "God," one of the men whispered. "How does something move like that?" The trench ran straight past the hollow, cutting a clean path through the drifts. The men followed it with their lantern light, eyes straining against the dark. And that's when they noticed the footprints. Just beside the trench, spaced impossibly far apart, were faint impressions. Paw prints. But not pressed into the snow. Pressed beneath it, as if the weight had fallen from above, sinking into the layers without breaking the surface. The youngest stepped back in shock. "That's not possible," he said, voice tight. But the leader shook his head slowly. "It's not trying to hide its tracks," he whispered. "It's showing us that it doesn't need to leave any." A cold silence settled over them. The kind that feels thick, like the world itself is holding its breath. The trench continued on, vanishing into the far edge of the storm. And then, just as they began to turn back toward the hollow, something shifted behind them. A faint, soft crunch in the snow. They spun around as one, lanterns raised, hearts pounding. But there was nothing. Only darkness. Only the faint glow of their shelter below. "It's playing with us," one man said, his voice cracking. The leader didn't answer, because he had seen something the others hadn't. On the ridge behind them, where they had walked just moments earlier, their own footprints were already fading, disappearing, as if brushed away by an unseen hand. Whatever moved through this land was not simply strong. It had control. and it didn't want to be followed. They returned to the hollow in a tight, silent line, the lantern shaking faintly in their hands. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The trench, the half-prints beneath the snow, their own fading tracks. These things had carved a cold understanding into each man's mind. One they weren't ready to say out loud. Whatever had followed them through the storm wasn't just a predator. It was something else. Something that understood them. Something that chose how much of itself it wanted them to see. And that thought weighed heavily on all of them. But on Elias most of all. He sat apart from the group, knees pulled tight to his chest, staring at the dim glow of the lanterns, as if they were the only things keeping him tethered to the world. "We shouldn't have come here," he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word. The leader knelt beside him. "Elias, listen to me." But Elias flinched away from his touch, shaking his head in small, panicked movements. "No. You didn't hear it. You don't know what it wants." The others gathered closer, though none stepped too near. Fear spreads easily in the cold, and Elias's fear had started to feel infectious. "It's been following us since the first footprint," Elias said. "Maybe even before that." "Elias." "It doesn't need to eat," Elias continued, talking over the leader's calm voice. His words growing fast and breathless. "It doesn't leave tracks. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't make mistakes." His chest heaved. "It's not hunting us the way animals hunt. It's choosing." The men exchanged uneasy looks. Elias's voice dropped into a trembling whisper. "It knows which one of us is the weakest." A sharp gust of wind struck the hollow then, shaking loose a shower of snow from the ridge above. The lantern flames shivered, shrinking back as if something had leaned over them. Elias let out a broken sob. "It was behind me all day," he murmured. "I heard it. Every time I turned, it stopped. Every time I walked faster, it matched me." He pressed a hand to his chest, as if trying to steady the frantic beat of his heart. "And when the darkness came early, it was because of me." Something in his voice made the other's skin crawl. The leader grabbed his shoulders gently. "Elias, that's not true. We stay together. We watch each other. Nothing is going to." But Elias cut him off with a whisper so soft, it barely carried through the hollow. "It breathes when I breathe." The others froze. "What are you talking about?" Elias looked up at them, and for the first time since they'd begun the journey, there was something hollow in his eyes. Something as empty and cold as the land around them. "When I inhale," he said, "I hear it inhale with me. When I exhale, I hear another breath, just behind mine. Like it's waiting. Matching me. Preparing." A deep tremor of wind moved across the snow then, and somewhere out in the dark came that slow, heavy exhale again. Too deep. Too deliberate. Too close. The men huddled together instinctively. Elias did not move. He only whispered, "It's choosing me." By morning, Elias was quieter. Too quiet. He didn't look at the others, didn't speak, didn't eat. He only sat with his knees pulled close, staring at the snow as if something beneath it was calling his name. The leader watched him for a long moment. Then he made a decision. "We leave," he said. The others didn't argue. There was no more doubt, no more talk of weather patterns or animal behavior. Whatever was following them wasn't going to lose interest. They packed quickly, moving with stiff hands and tense shoulders, flinching at every sound the snow made beneath their boots. The sky overhead was deep gray, a color that usually meant a storm approaching, but today it felt different. Heavier. Unmoving, like a lid closing over them. "We head west," the leader said. "The settlement is 2 days behind us. If we push hard, we can reach the coast by nightfall." It was a lie. The coast was far too distant for a single day's travel. But fear has a way of bending the truth into something people are willing to follow. They began walking in a tight line, lanterns hanging from their belts, rifles clutched but pointed low. Snow rose around them in soft curls, brushing against their coats like drifting fingers. For the first hour, nothing happened. No sounds in the trees. No breathing behind them. No shifting shadows. It felt almost normal. "Maybe it left," one man whispered. But Elias shook his head without looking up. "It's here," he murmured. "It's always here." They kept moving. The world around them seemed to stretch, as if the plain were widening with every step, turning their progress into a slow, forced march through an endless white desert. An hour passed. Then another. The leader checked his compass. He frowned. "That can't be right." The compass needle spun lazily, drifting in slow circles, refusing to settle. "Use the sun," someone said nervously. But when they looked up, the sky was nothing but a uniform sheet of gray. No light. No warmth. No direction. Just the same dull color, all the way to the horizon. They tried landmarks next. A broken ridge. A cluster of black pines. A low valley. But every time they reached one, the land around them seemed to shift. As if the world itself was rearranging while they walked. "We've passed that tree before," one man whispered. "No, we haven't," another insisted. But deep down, they all knew. They were walking in circles. The cold grew sharper. The air felt thinner. And then the wind began to push against them. Not from one direction, but from all directions at once. As if the land itself was trying to herd them back toward something. Elias stopped walking. "It doesn't want us to leave," he said softly. The next moment, a deep sound rolled across the snow. Low and steady. Like the rumble of something enormous shifting its weight. The leader raised a hand, signaling everyone to freeze. But the sound did not fade. It grew. Louder. Closer. A deep exhale. Followed by another. And another. Circling them, in the wide, open plain. The men huddled together, their eyes scanning the white void for any sign of movement. But there was nothing to see. Only the sound of breath. Enormous, heavy, patient. Drifting through the falling snow. The leader swallowed hard. "Don't run," he whispered. "Running means splitting up." But Elias was trembling violently now. His boots slipping in the snow as he backed away from the group. "It wants one of us," he said. And with a sudden, broken gasp, Elias turned and bolted into the white. The others shouted his name, their voices muffled by the storm. The leader took one step after him. Then stopped. Because the breathing had changed. It was no longer circling them. It was following Elias. Elias ran without direction, without thought, without even the hope of escape. His boots kicked up small bursts of snow as he disappeared into the white haze. His dark figure swallowed quickly by the falling light. "Elias!" The leader's voice echoed across the empty plain, thin and powerless against the storm. The others shouted too, but their voices felt strange in the open air, as if the land itself refused to carry the sound. They took a few steps after him, instinct forcing them forward, fear pulling them back. Because they heard it. All of them. That deep, steady breathing that moved through the snow. Like a second wind. Heavier and lower than any human sound should be. It followed Elias. Always just behind him. Never rushing. Never struggling. Just coming. The leader raised his lantern and squinted into the white void. Elias! Stop! Come back to us! But Elias didn't stop. His form shrank with every step, fading into the thick snow until he was little more than a shadow, flitting through a world of pale grey. The men broke into a slow run, shouting his name, their hearts pounding with the desperate hope that they might reach him before something else did. Elias stumbled once, throwing his hands out to catch himself. For a moment, they saw his outline clearly. Hunched, gasping, small against the vastness of the Arctic. Hold on, the leader shouted. We're coming. Elias lifted his head. Not toward them, but toward something behind him. Something they could not see. The snow around him shifted. A ripple. A distortion. Like heat rising from pavement on a summer road. Except the air here was far below freezing. Elias's breath came in ragged pulls. And then he whispered one last sentence, carried faintly by the wind. It's beside me. The leader froze, just as Elias jerked backward. A sudden, violent motion with no visible cause. His feet left the ground. His lantern fell and vanished into the snow. And then, silence. Elias was gone. No scream. No struggle. No shape dragging him away. Just the empty plain, smooth and untouched. As if he had stepped through a doorway that had not been there a moment before. The men stumbled forward, frantic, searching for any sign of him. Look for footprints, someone yelled. But there were none. The snow lay in perfect, unbroken waves. No marks. No disruption. Nothing to show that Elias had ever stood there. This isn't possible, whispered the radio man. But it was. Because just then, from somewhere deep in the haze, came a sound that made every man freeze in place. A low exhale. Slow. Heavy. Satisfied. The leader's voice cracked as he spoke. We have to move. Now. And as they backed away from the empty space where Elias had vanished, each man felt the same chilling truth settle in his bones. Elias hadn't been taken in anger. He had been taken because he was alone. And the Amarok had finally chosen its first victim. They didn't speak as they retreated from the place where Elias had vanished. Words felt too small now, too fragile to survive in the cold that surrounded them. When they reached the hollow again, the leader forced himself to breathe slowly. Trying to think. Trying to believe there was still something they could do. Check your packs, he said quietly. Make sure nothing else is missing. The men knelt, opening their bags with stiff, trembling hands. Tools. Food. Blankets. Most of it was still there. But when the leader reached Elias's abandoned pack, he hesitated. It sat where the man had left it that morning, half buried in the snow, the straps stiff with frost. For a long moment he only stared at it, as if touching it would make everything real. Too real. Then he opened it. Inside were the usual supplies. A frozen water flask, 2 ration tins, an extra pair of gloves. And underneath them, wrapped in a worn piece of cloth, was a small, leather-bound journal. The leader swallowed hard. Elias wasn't the kind of man who kept secrets. He was anxious, honest, always speaking his mind. Until the last 2 days, when fear had sealed his mouth shut. With a shaking hand, the leader opened the journal to the first page. Day 1. The cold feels different here. Not just colder. Heavier. The locals won't go past the tree line. They won't even look at it for long. When I tried to joke about wolves, one of the elders told me, "The ones you fear are not the ones we speak of." The leader frowned. Elias hadn't mentioned this conversation. He turned another page. Day 2. I heard something last night. Not a howl. More like breathing. But steady. Purposeful. Not the sound an animal makes to survive. The sound something makes when it is waiting. The leader felt a cold prickling along his arms. Elias had heard it before any of them had. He flipped ahead again, past shaky handwriting and smudged graphite. Day 3. We found a print in the snow. The others think it's a wolf. I know it isn't. The print was warm. Something heavy stood there just before we arrived. But the snow around it wasn't disturbed. As if it stepped in without entering. The leader stopped breathing for a moment. He turned the page. Day 4. It's following us. I can feel it more clearly each time the light dims. The others don't feel it yet. But it's watching all of us. It's choosing. The leader's eyes moved slowly to the final entry. Written just that morning. The graphite heavier, the lines crooked and jagged. If you find this, I need you to understand something. It doesn't hunt because it's hungry. It hunts because it recognizes something in us. Fear. Isolation. Weakness. Whatever it was in me. I heard it whisper last night. Not words. Something deeper. I think it was counting. The leader closed the journal slowly, hands trembling. The others watched him with wide, exhausted eyes. What did it say? The radio man asked. The leader looked out at the empty snowfield where Elias had vanished. His voice was barely more than a breath. It wasn't choosing just him. A long, low wind drifted through the hollow then. The soft, cold exhale of something enormous settling into the snow nearby. The leader kept the journal in his hands long after he finished reading, staring at the worn cover as if the rest of the story might seep through the leather if he waited long enough. But the land didn't give him that luxury. As the men gathered their things, a strange, heavy pressure settled over the hollow. The same silent weight they had felt just before Elias began to break. It was the feeling of something enormous choosing to be near. The radio man whispered, "We can't stay here." And he was right. They packed quickly, moving in stiff, hurried motions. Each breath hanging in the air a little too long. The sky overhead darkened again. Not from clouds, not from approaching night. But as if something unseen was leaning over the world, dimming it. Lanterns on, the leader said softly. The men lit them. Tiny circles of trembling light glowed in the snow, fragile and thin, against the vast grey dark around them. They climbed the ridge slowly. No one wanted to reach the top. No one wanted to see what might be waiting there. But they had to keep moving. As they neared the crest, the wind shifted. A low, steady breeze, carrying a scent that did not belong in the Arctic. Warm, heavy, metallic almost. The leader frowned. "Do you smell that?" No one answered, because just then the snow ahead of them changed. The smooth white surface quivered. A faint tremor, like something massive was moving beneath it. One of the men gasped and pointed. A shadow stretched across the ridge. Long. Too long. It moved with a slow, deliberate pace, sliding across the snow even though nothing visible cast it. The radio man whispered, "No, that's not possible." But the shadow grew, widened, rose upward, as if something tall was lifting its head just beyond the edge of their lantern light. The leader whispered, "Stay together." The men pressed in close, forming a tight circle. Lanterns held out like shields. And then the snow in front of them shifted again, this time rising in a wide arc. The way drifts bend around the legs of something enormous when it walks. But they heard no footsteps, only the soft, rhythmic sound of breath. Elias had described it perfectly. The breath matched theirs, inhaling when they inhaled, exhaling when they exhaled, until it felt as though something was leaning over them in the dark, sharing their air, counting their heartbeats. The leader raised his lantern higher, pushing the trembling light toward the shape. For a moment, just a moment, the snow parted enough to reveal a curve. A shoulder? A massive rib cage? A shape too large to belong to anything living that moves on four legs. And then, two eyes. Not glowing, not shining like the eyes of a predator, but reflecting the lantern light the way ice does when it sits over something deep, dark, and ancient. The men froze. No one breathed. The eyes watched them for a long, unbearable moment. Steady, unblinking, patient. And then the shadow lowered itself and slipped silently back behind the ridge. No roar, no chase, no movement a man could track. Just a slow, measured retreat, as if the creature was letting them know exactly how close it could come without being heard. The radio man whispered, voice shaking, "It could have taken all of us right now." The leader nodded, unable to tear his gaze from the settling snow. "It doesn't want all of us," he said softly. "Not yet." They didn't speak for several minutes after the shadow slipped back into the storm. Each man stood stiff and silent on the ridge, lanterns trembling in their hands, hearts beating too fast for the cold around them. The leader was the first to move. "We need shelter," he said quietly. "Not safety, not escape. Shelter. A place with walls. A place where the wind couldn't carry the sound of something massive circling them." The men nodded silently and followed him down the ridge. The world had grown dim again. Not full night, but a deepening dusk that felt as though it had been pushed toward them rather than naturally falling. After nearly an hour of trudging through heavy snow, they saw it. A shape ahead. Small. Angular. A structure. A cabin, the radio man gasped, his voice cracking with sudden hope. It wasn't a cabin exactly. More like an old trapper's shack, half buried in drifts, leaning under the weight of 100 winters. But it had walls. And a door. and a roof that still held. That was enough. They hurried toward it, stumbling through the deep snow, hauling their packs and lanterns like lifelines. The shack groaned softly as the wind pushed against it, its wooden frame complaining in long, tired creaks. "Get inside," the leader said. They forced the frozen door open and stepped into the dark interior. The air was stale, sharp with the scent of old wood and trapped cold. Snow covered the corners of the floor, blown in through cracks in the walls. But it felt like a fortress compared to the open plain outside. They lit 2 lanterns and hung them from rusty hooks near the ceiling. The weak orange light spread across the room, revealing a table, an overturned crate, and the remains of a long-dead fire in a stone hearth. The leader dropped his pack on the ground. "We stay together," he said again, as if repeating the rule might somehow hold the world in place. The men nodded. No one dared sit until the leader sat first. As they settled, the wind outside shifted. A low, steady moan brushing along the wooden slats, like a slow breath sliding beneath the door. The radio man swallowed. "Do you think it knows we're here?" The leader didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the far wall, where a narrow crack let in a thin line of pale light. That light flickered. Once. Twice. Like something large was moving past the outside of the shack. "It knows," the leader said softly. They sat in tense silence, listening to the wind gather strength. Then came a sound that made every man stiffen. A soft, deliberate scrape along the wooden boards outside. Not claws. Not paws. Something broad. Something heavy sliding along the wall, as if tracing the boundary of their fragile shelter. The lantern flames fluttered, shrinking back as the sound moved from one side of the shack to the next. Slow. Patient. Measuring. The radio man pressed his back against the far wall, his eyes wide. "Why isn't it attacking?" he whispered. The leader's reply was nothing more than a breath. "Because it doesn't need to." As if answering him, the boards behind the leader's head bowed inward just a little. A soft, almost gentle pressure, like the weight of a massive shoulder leaning curiously against the wall. One of the men gasped and clapped a hand over his mouth. The pressure faded. The scraping sound drifted away from the wall and returned to the door. A moment later the lanterns flickered again. Something outside exhaled, long and slow. And the air in the shack grew colder, as if the creature's warmth had seeped through the cracks. The leader closed his eyes. "It's waiting," he whispered. "It knows this place won't save us." Darkness settled over the shack long before any of the men were ready for it. The lanterns offered 2 small pools of trembling light, but beyond those circles the room sank into heavy shadow. Thick and unmoving. No one lay down. No one dared to close their eyes. They sat with their backs to the walls, rifles across their legs, listening to the wind shift and groan around the wooden frame. For a while, that was all there was. Just the wind. And their breath. Then, a soft creak. Not from the wind. From the far corner of the room. The radio man turned his head slowly. "Did one of you move?" No one had. The corner remained dark, but the air felt different there. Thicker somehow, like a cold fog had begun pooling in that one spot. The leader lifted a lantern and shone it toward the shadows. Nothing. Just old boards and drifting dust. But when he lowered the lantern, the room made a new sound. A low, quiet thump against the exterior wall. Like something shifting its weight just outside the shack. The thump came again. Soft, controlled, far too deliberate to be the storm. Then another, higher up the wall, near the roof. The pressure returned. That slow, gentle bowing of the wood, as though something enormous was leaning its weight across the shack's fragile spine. The lantern nearest the door flickered. Once. Twice. Then flared bright, before shrinking to a thin blue flame. "It's stealing the heat," whispered one of the men, voice shaking. And in a way, that was exactly what it was doing. The temperature dropped. Not gradually, but sharply, as if something outside had inhaled and pulled all the warmth through the cracks in the walls. Frost bloomed across the wooden boards. The radio man's breath fogged into thick, white clouds. "It's coming in," he said, unable to stop the tremor in his voice. The leader steadied himself. "Stay together. No matter what you hear." A soft scrape whispered along the floorboards just behind them. Every man spun around. Rifles raised, lanterns trembling. But there was nothing there. Only cold. Only darkness. The scrape came again. This time from the opposite side of the shack. Then the ceiling. Then the door. It moved too quickly, too smoothly, to be footsteps. It was as if a huge body was passing through the walls, circling them the same way it had out on the open snow. But now with only a thin layer of wood between them. The leader clenched his jaw. "It's testing our fear," he whispered. "It wants someone to break." For a moment, silence returned. Heavy. Waiting. Then, from the darkest corner of the shack, came a sound that froze every man where he sat. A breath. Not outside. Inside. Slow and deliberate, matching their rhythm exactly. Inhale. Exhale. The lantern flames shrank again, bowing toward the corner as if drawn by something powerful sitting in the shadows. One man whispered, "It's here." And the room answered with a long, low exhale that felt warm against their skin. Far too warm for anything living in the Arctic night. The breath in the corner faded, but the cold it left behind stayed inside the room like a living thing. The men sat frozen, their eyes locked on the dark corner, waiting for a shape to emerge. But nothing moved. The only sound was their own breathing, overlapping with the memory of the one that did not belong to them. Finally, one of the men, Calloway, the quietest in the group, stood up. "Sit down," the leader whispered. But Calloway shook his head, eyes wide and shining in the lantern light. "I can't stay in here," his voice trembled. "It's suffocating us. It's choking us in our own breath." The radio man reached out to steady him. "Calloway, listen." But Calloway jerked away from his touch, stumbling backward until his shoulder struck the far wall. The shack creaked around him. Wood bowing slightly, as though answering the pressure of his panic. "I hear it," Calloway whispered. "Not outside. Inside. In the walls. In the floor." He clutched the sides of his head. "It's been following us since the first night. It's behind us, under us, around us. It's everywhere." The leader kept his voice low. "Calloway, stay with us. Stay in the circle." But Calloway shook his head harder. "No circle keeps this thing out." His breath hitched, sharp and shallow. "Elias didn't run," he said suddenly. The room fell very still. The leader frowned. "What are you talking about?" Calloway's eyes snapped up, pupils huge, reflecting the lantern flame like black glass. "Elias didn't run. It pulled him. A shiver ran through the room. "We saw him run," said the radio man. But Calloway shook his head violently. "No. You think he ran. But that thing, it gets inside your senses. It makes you see what it wants you to see." He took a step toward the door. The leader rose quickly. "Calloway, don't." But Calloway wasn't listening anymore. His breath grew uneven, matching Elias's final panic, the same rising desperation they had all ignored. "I need air," he said. "I need to breathe without it breathing with me." He reached for the door. The lanterns flickered violently, one going out entirely, plunging half the room into darkness. "Calloway, stop!" But his hand was already on the latch. He pulled the door open and stepped into the storm. And immediately the sound returned. That deep, slow exhale. So close it felt like it came from just above the doorway. Calloway froze. The leader lunged forward to pull him back inside. But the wind slammed the door shut with a force that shook the shack. The leader crashed against the boards, rattling the frame, struggling to get the latch open again. "Calloway!" But when he forced the door back open, there was no one there. Only the storm. Only snow swirling in slow, drifting spirals. No footprints. No trail. Just emptiness. The radio man's voice cracked behind him. It didn't even give him time to scream. The leader stepped out into the snow, lantern held high, his breath shaking in the cold air. "Calloway!" But the wind carried nothing back. Except a faint, deep sigh. Warm against the frozen air, like something enormous was satisfied after its second choice of the night. The door slammed shut again as the leader stepped back inside, the force of it rattling the old hinges and sending a burst of cold air spiraling into the lantern light. Calloway was gone. 2 men lost in a single night. Taken without a sound. Without a trace. The remaining men pressed together instinctively, their fear gathering like a living thing between them. The leader shut the door fully, his hand shaking as he dropped the wooden bar across the frame. It felt pointless. A lock meant nothing to something that could slide through the walls. But he did it anyway. Sometimes men need the idea of safety more than safety itself. "Sit close," he whispered. They obeyed. The 2 lanterns flickered weakly, one near the door, one hanging from a beam. The shadows they cast swayed gently, not with the flame, but with something in the air. The leader felt it first. A pressure. Not loud. Not violent. But deep, settling into the wooden boards like a weight. The shack groaned, a long bending sigh that came from the walls themselves. "It's the wind," the radio man said quickly, though his voice betrayed him. The leader shook his head. "Listen." They did. And the men heard it clearly. The wind wasn't the source. Something was pushing outward from inside the walls. The boards expanded slightly, then relaxed. Expanded. Relaxed. As though the shack were breathing. The lantern near the door dimmed suddenly, as if a shadow had passed over it, yet nothing stood between it and the flame. "Look at the floor," the leader said quietly. The snow that had blown in earlier had begun to shift. Not melt. Shift. Sliding in small soft ripples toward the far corner of the room, as if something beneath the floorboards was drawing it in. Then the walls gave another slow, bending creak. This time lower. Deeper. Almost like a growl. The radio man threw his pack across the room, as though something might erupt from the wood itself. "It's inside," Radio Man shouted. "It's inside the shack." The leader raised his lantern higher, illuminating the cracks between the boards. Cold air pushed through, not in random gusts, but in rhythmic pulses, falling perfectly in time with the exhale they'd heard outside. "It doesn't have to get through the door," the leader whispered. "It can move through anything that cannot hold its weight." As they watched, one of the beams overhead began to bend. Not with age, not with wind, but with pressure from something tall settling its weight across the roof. Snow slid off the shingles in sheets. Dust drifted from the rafters. The lantern fire shuddered. "It's crushing us," one man whispered, his voice cracking with terror. The leader put a hand on his shoulder. "No. Not crushing." The shack creaked again. A slow, deliberate bowing that felt almost thoughtful. "It's testing us," the leader said, his voice barely more than a breath. Outside, the Amarok exhaled again. Long, steady, and terrifyingly patient. As if reminding them that walls mean nothing to something older than the land itself. The shack continued to breathe around them. Rising and falling in slow, heavy pulses, the wood expanding under a weight they could not see, only feel. Each groan in the beams was deeper than the last. Each flicker of the lantern shorter and weaker. The men huddled near the center of the room, backs pressed together, their rifles shaking in their hands. "We can't stay here," the radio man whispered. His voice was thin, exhausted. "This place is going to collapse on us." The leader glanced toward the roof. The beam that had begun bending earlier now sagged visibly. Just an inch or two, but enough to speak of pressure no storm could create. Snow sifted downward from it in a slow, steady trickle, falling like white sand in an hourglass. "It's pushing down harder," one man said, barely above a whisper. The shack creaked again, long and low, like a living thing settling into the weight of its own bones. "It wants us scared," the leader murmured. "Wants someone to bolt." Behind them, something brushed the outer wall. A sound so soft it could have been a hand, trailing gently along the wood. The radio man froze. "We leave," he said. "Now. All together. Before it chooses another of us." The leader didn't answer at first. He looked at the floor. The thin layer of snow inside the shack was shifting again. Gathering toward the darkest corner, the way water slides toward a drain. As if something beneath the boards was inhaling. He felt his chest tighten. "If we go," he said carefully, "it will follow us." "It's already following us," someone shot back. A crack split the silence. A sharp, splintering sound as another beam overhead bowed inward. The men flinched. Something enormous shifted its weight on the roof. Snow slid off in thick sheets, thudding into the drifts outside like heavy bodies falling. "If we stay," the radioman said, "we die in here." The leader closed his eyes. He knew the truth. Staying meant being crushed, or suffocated, or driven mad by the slow, patient presence of whatever moved outside. But leaving, that was exactly what the Amarok wanted. Walls forced them together. Snowfields tore people apart. He opened his eyes. The shack groaned once more. This time a drawn-out, warping moan that sent dust raining down from the rafters. The decision wasn't really his anymore. "We run," he finally said. The men scrambled for their packs, each movement frantic, jerky, afraid. As they prepared to open the door, the lantern nearest the wall flared suddenly. A bright, violent flash that stretched their shadows long across the floor. In that fleeting moment, the leader saw something shift in the corner of the room. Not a body. Not a shape. A ripple. Like space itself folding inwards and outwards, the way heat warps the air. But cold. Impossibly cold. Then the lantern dimmed again, leaving only trembling orange light. "Don't look back," the leader said softly. "When we open that door, no matter what you hear behind you, don't look back." The radio man asked, terrified. "What if it's close?" The leader's voice was barely a whisper. "It is close." He lifted the bar from the door, placed his hand on the frozen latch. "On my count. 3, 2. Outside, something exhaled directly against the door frame. 1. The leader flung the door open. A wave of freezing air crashed into the shack, stabbing at their lungs, numbing their faces. The night outside was a swirling storm of white. Sharp snow, drifting shadows, loose ice whipping through the wind. "Go," the leader shouted. They stumbled into the blinding cold, boots sinking deep into fresh drifts. Behind them, the shack let out a long, bending groan. The sound of wood being relieved of an immense weight. Something stepped off the roof. The snow trembled under the impact. The men didn't look back. They ran. Lanterns swung wildly at their sides, casting erratic beams of light that stretched and broke against the swirling storm. The wind howled directly into their faces, pushing them back, fighting every step, as if the land itself did not want them moving forward. "Stay together," the leader yelled. "Don't spread out." But panic fractures even the strongest grip. 2 men veered left, trying to find firmer snow. The radio man stumbled to the right, as the wind shoved him sideways. The leader tried to pull them back into formation, but the storm tore their voices apart, shredding their words before they reached anyone. The snow grew deeper. Their legs burned. Their lungs ached. Still, they ran. Because behind them, carried on the rising wind, came the sound they had dreaded most. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Rhythmic. Growing louder with every second. "Don't stop," the leader cried. But one of the men, Harper, did stop. He froze mid-step, staring ahead as if something had appeared in front of him. "Harper! Move!" But Harper couldn't. His lantern lay in the snow beside him, half buried by the wind, its flame flickering violently. "It's here!" Harper whispered. The snow around his boots shifted slightly. Not falling, not sinking, but pulling as if something beneath the surface was drawing it in. The leader shoved through the storm toward him. "Harper, run!" Harper took one step, and then stopped again, his eyes wide, breath shaking. "It's not behind us," he said slowly. "It's everywhere." The leader reached him, grabbed his arm, pulled hard. "Move!" Harper stumbled forward, but the snow resisted. It clung to him, gripping his legs like wet sand. Harper screamed. The snow at his feet deepened suddenly, swallowing his boots, then his knees. "Don't let go," he shouted. The leader held on with both hands, bracing against the wind. But Harper was sinking, straight down. Not pulled by gravity, but pulled downward and backward, as if something enormous beneath the snow had hooked its claws into his legs. The radio man reached them, grabbing Harper's other arm. "Pull him out!" The 2 men strained, muscles burning, boots slipping in the frozen crust. Harper's scream tore through the storm, then cut off abruptly, as something yanked him downward so violently it ripped the sleeves of his coat clean off. He vanished beneath the snow. Gone. No movement. No struggle. Just a smooth, silent crater, filling slowly with drifting flakes. The radio man staggered back, his eyes wide with horror. "It's under us," he whispered. The leader turned toward the darkness, heart pounding, breath shaking. Because now he heard it clearly. The breathing was not behind them, or beside them, or circling them. It was beneath them, as if the creature moved through the snow itself. Following. Choosing. Pulling down the ones who could not keep up. "Run," the leader said softly. "Run now." They ran. Not toward a destination, not with a plan, but with the wild, animal knowledge that something beneath the snow had tasted fear, and would not stop now. The storm swallowed their tracks as fast as they made them. The darkness pressed close, lantern light barely reaching more than a few paces ahead. There were 4 of them when they fled the shack. Now there were 3. The leader, the radio man, and Barlow, the strongest of the group, heavy-set, steady-handed, a man everyone believed would be the last to break. But now even Barlow's breath shook behind the leader's shoulder. "Keep moving," the leader said, forcing his voice to remain even. "It won't take all of us at once." "That's not comforting." Barlow snapped, his fear too raw to hide anymore. The radio man stumbled again, nearly falling to one knee. The leader grabbed him by the collar and pulled him upright. "Don't stop. Don't slow. Do you hear me?" The radio man nodded weakly. But the fear in his eyes said something else. "I won't last." And the leader knew it too. The Amarok knew weakness the same way it knew scent, or sound, or breath. It didn't need to chase. It only needed to wait for the one who faltered. The storm thinned for a moment, opening into a wider stretch of snowfield. The leader lifted his lantern high and froze. Ahead of them, barely visible through the drifting white, was a tall, dark shape. Not moving. Not advancing. Standing. Watching. The radio man gasped. "Is that?" "Don't look at it," the leader said quickly. "Keep your eyes on the ground." Barlow squinted into the storm. "It's not coming toward us." "It doesn't have to." The leader grabbed them both by the sleeves and turned them sharply to the right, forcing them to veer off the straight path. The shape did not move. But as they changed direction, the snow behind them shifted. A deep, rolling motion, like something enormous settling into a new position beneath the surface. The men stumbled faster, boots punching through crusted snow. "It's hurting us," the radio man whispered. He was right. With every direction they turned, something unseen adjusted its position. Not to block them, but to steer them. "It's choosing the place," Barlow said quietly. His voice sounded far away. The leader didn't answer. He couldn't. Because now the breathing returned. Not close, not far, but everywhere. Surrounding them. Matching their steps. Growing louder every time the radio man stumbled. "I can't," the radio man gasped, bending forward, hands on his knees. Barlow grabbed his arm, trying to yank him upright. "Move, damn you!" But the radio man's legs buckled. He collapsed to one knee. "Get up," the leader barked. "I'm trying." The snow beneath the radio man's boot sank suddenly. Just an inch. But the leader saw it. A soft depression, widening slowly, as if a massive mouth beneath the snow was opening. Up, the leader shouted, grabbing both of the radio man's arms. Barlow hauled from the other side. The radio man screamed as the snow tightened around his leg like a fist. The leader pulled harder. The snow tightened again. Another inch. Another. Barlow's voice broke. It's got him. The leader ripped the radio man free with a violent heave that sent all three men tumbling backward. The radio man collapsed into the leader's arms, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. I felt it, he whispered. I felt its teeth. Barlow's voice was barely audible. It's not a wolf. The leader didn't respond. Because he already understood the truth. The Amarok wasn't hunting bodies. It was hunting fractions, breaking the group piece by piece until the moment came when only one would remain. And now, as the breathing deepened, slow, heavy, deliberate, the leader realized something else. The Amarok wasn't choosing at random. It was saving one of them for last. They moved again, half carrying the radio man between them. Stumbling through the deepening drifts, while the storm pressed closer and closer around their bodies, like a tightening fist. The leader felt the radio man's weight dragging on his arm. Felt the man's breath stuttering in his chest, felt the tremors running through him. Barlow, the leader said, his voice hoarse from the cold. Take his other side. We keep him up. We keep him moving. But Barlow didn't answer. The leader turned. Barlow stood a few paces behind, shoulders rising and falling in slow, strained motions. His lantern hung at his side, casting a trembling glow across a face that was no longer angry, or determined, or strong. It was terrified. Barlow, the leader called. Barlow blinked slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep. It tried to take him, he said, his voice low and hollow. And it almost took me with him. The leader frowned. Barlow, that wasn't your fault. We kept him out. We kept all of us out. But Barlow shook his head. You didn't feel it, he whispered. I did. Snow drifted thick around him, swirling in slow circles as if drawn toward his body. I felt its pull. Not on my legs. Not on my boots. Here. He placed a shaking hand against his chest. It pulled my fear. The leader stepped toward him, but Barlow took a stumbling step back. Don't. Barlow whispered. Don't come closer. The radio man's breath caught. Barlow, what's happening to you? Barlow's head dropped. His breath came in uneven bursts, fogging the air in front of him in frantic white clouds. I hear it, he whispered. Not around me. Not beneath me. Inside me. The leader froze. The radio man whimpered softly. The snow around Barlow's boots began to sink. Not quickly. Not violently. But gently. As if a massive hand were cupping the ground beneath him. Barlow, move, the leader shouted. But Barlow didn't move. His lantern swung slowly from his hand, casting long, wavering shadows across the snow. I'm tired, he whispered. So tired of running. The leader grabbed his arm and instantly felt it. A force. Not outward, but inward, pulling Barlow deeper into himself. As if the Amarok had reached through the man's fear and hooked onto something inside him. Barlow, listen to me, the leader said, pulling harder. Fight it. Do you hear me? Fight it. But Barlow's gaze was distant, unfocused, fixed on something in the storm that no one else could see. And when he spoke, his voice was almost calm. "It's not pulling me." Snow rose around his legs. A soft, circular drift that tightened like a snare. Barlow lifted his head, his eyes reflecting the lantern light like two drowning stars. "I'm giving in." The leader lunged, roaring Barlow's name. But the snow beneath Barlow collapsed inward with the smooth, silent motion of something enormous withdrawing beneath the surface. Barlow's body sank to his knees, then to his waist, and still he did not struggle. "Take me," he whispered, his voice strangely steady. "But leave the others." The radio man screamed his name. The leader pulled with all his strength, but Barlow wasn't being taken. He was letting go. With a final exhale, Barlow disappeared into the snow, as if falling through a sheet of ice into black water. The wind swallowed the last of his breath. The snow stilled. And the Amarok exhaled. Long. Slow. Satisfied. They did not speak after Barlow vanished. There was nothing left to say. The leader and the radio man stood shoulder to shoulder in the storm, staring at the smooth, untouched snow where the strongest man among them had simply ceased to be. The radio man wiped his face with a shaking glove. It's just us now." The leader nodded, but the motion felt hollow, as if it belonged to someone else. He lifted his lantern again. The flame shivered, shrinking back as though something in the storm were drawing the heat away. "We move," the leader said quietly. The radio man hesitated. "Where?" "We don't even know what direction we're going anymore." The leader looked out across the endless white. "Forward." It was a meaningless answer, but it was the only one they had. They trudged on, boots punching through deep drifts, lantern beams slicing narrow paths through the storm. The world felt wrong now. Tighter. Smaller. As if the land itself had drawn its edges inward, hemming them into a shrinking cage of cold and dark. And the breathing. The breathing was no longer distant. It followed in perfect rhythm. A low inhale paired with theirs. A heavy exhale falling between their own. "It's close," the radio man whispered. "It's been close the whole time," the leader replied. "Now it's done waiting." The snow ahead of them shifted. A soft, rolling wave under the surface, keeping pace with their steps. The radio man stumbled. "It's under us again." "Don't stop," the leader snapped. But it was too late. The snow behind them began to rise. Not in small flurries. In a long, slow arc. A ridge forming along the ground, lifting with the smooth, deliberate motion of a great spine breaking the surface. The radio man screamed. The leader grabbed him and pulled him forward. "Run!" They ran. The storm shredded their breath, tore the warmth from their lungs, but they ran. Behind them, the rising arc of snow moved faster, matching their speed, then closing the distance. The leader didn't look back. He didn't need to. He felt it. He felt the earth tremble behind them with each slow, deliberate shift of something impossibly massive gliding beneath the surface. The radio man cried out, "It's gaining! It's gaining! Don't look back!" But the radio man did. His scream tore through the storm. "It's rising!" The leader risked a glance and saw it. A shape beginning to break the surface. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough to reveal the outline of something far larger than any creature should be. A shoulder. A massive curve of rib. Snow cascading off a broad shape like water falling from stone. And eyes. two cold reflections catching the lantern light from within the storm. The leader wrenched his head forward again. Don't stop. Don't speak. Don't think. Just run. Their legs burned. Their chests screamed for air. But the Amarok no longer paced them. It wasn't waiting for one to fall behind. It was done choosing. Now it wanted both. The ground trembled with every rising surge of snow behind them. The radio man sobbed as he ran. We're dead, oh God, we're dead. Not yet, the leader said. And then the storm shifted. The snow ahead of them thinned, forming a narrow break in the white that stretched toward a distant ridge, barely visible through the blizzard. There, the leader shouted, "Move!" They sprinted toward it. Behind them, the Amarok let out no roar, no howl. Only a long, heavy exhale that rolled across the night like the breath of an ancient god. Disappointed that the chase was nearly done. The gap in the storm narrowed as they ran, the snow whipping around them like claws trying to drag them back. The ridge ahead was still distant. A dark, wavering line through the white. But it was the only thing in this endless wasteland that looked like a direction instead of a trap. Faster, the leader shouted, though his lungs felt like shards of ice. The radio man stumbled beside him, barely keeping his footing, his breath ragged and high. Behind them, the Amarok moved in silence. Only the tremor of the snow, and the deep, measured breath, gave away its pursuit. The ground shook again. The radio man cried out, "It's right behind us. Please, please. Keep running." But panic had already taken root. The radio man's steps grew erratic, slipping, faltering. The leader grabbed his coat, pulling him up. "Stay with me. Don't you dare fall." The radio man clung to him, sniffling through chattering teeth. I can't feel my legs." "You don't need to feel them," the leader hissed. "You just need to move." They pushed forward together, sharing breath, sharing fear, their boots hammering through the drifts. The ridge was closer now. Almost reachable. And then the radio man screamed. The leader whirled around. The snow beneath the radio man had collapsed into a deep funnel, a spiraling maw of white dragging him downward. "No!" The leader lunged forward, grabbing the radio man's wrists, yanking with all his strength. "Don't let go," the radio man cried. Snow swallowed his thighs. Then his waist. The leader dug his heels into the snow, pulling so hard his shoulders burned. "Fight it!" The radio man sobbed. "I'm trying." But the snow tightened again. A violent jerk that nearly pulled the leader off his feet. "Please," the radio man begged, his voice cracking. "Don't leave me. Don't let it take me. I don't want to go like the others." The leader pulled harder, teeth clenched, muscles screaming. He could feel the Amarok's strength now. Not physical, but something deeper, colder. A pull that felt like gravity in the wrong direction. The radio man's grip began to slip. "No. Stay with me." The radio man met his eyes. His face was pale, his lips blue, but in that final moment there was something like peace behind his fear. "It wants you now," he whispered. "Not me." And then the snow pulled him under with a sudden, brutal force, ripping his hands from the leader's grip and engulfing him completely. The leader screamed his name into the storm, falling to his knees as the snow smoothed over, leaving no sign that anyone had ever stood there. No prints. No struggle. Nothing. Just silence. Broken only by the deep, steady breath of something now standing directly behind him. The leader did not turn. He rose, lantern trembling in his hand. He walked toward the ridge because there was nothing else left to do. He did not look back. He did not dare. And that is why he became the lone survivor. They found him 2 days later. Half frozen. Half conscious. Stumbling across the ice with a broken lantern and no shadow behind him. The rescue team spotted him from a distance. A lone figure moving through the white, with the slow, drifting steps of a man caught between walking and falling. When they reached him, he didn't speak. He didn't look at them. He only kept moving, as if something behind him was still following. "You're safe," they told him. "It's over." But the leader shook his head. His lips were cracked, his eyes sunken and red from windburn. "No," he whispered. "Don't say that." They wrapped him in blankets, lifted him onto a sled, carried him back to the settlement where the storm could not reach. Inside the outpost infirmary, they warmed him with lamps and wool and small sips of water. Only when his hand stopped shaking did they ask him what had happened. He told them pieces. Small things. The storm. The cold. The night stretching longer than they should have. But when they asked about the others, the men who should have been at his side, something inside him closed. They fell behind, he said softly. One by one. The doctors exchanged quiet looks. They had seen it before. Teams lost to storms, men swallowed by crevasses, caravans broken by whiteouts. But this felt different. Too clean. Too quiet. No bodies, one asked. The leader shook his head. Snow took them. Avalanche. No. His voice broke on the word. Not that. They pressed him for more. What took them? How did it happen? Why was he the only one left alive? He stared past them at the window, where wind brushed against the frosted glass in long, steady breaths. It was waiting for us, he said. His voice was soft, fragile. The kind of voice that belongs to someone remembering a nightmare that refused to fade with daylight. We walked into its territory. We didn't know. We couldn't have known. A doctor knelt beside him. What was waiting? He didn't answer at first. His eyes followed the drifting frost on the window pane. Thin streams of white rising and falling like breath. A hunter, he whispered at last. Older than the snow. Older than the cold. It chooses the ones who fall behind. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances. One of them gently pressed, what was it called? The leader closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his windburned cheek. The Amarok. Silence filled the room. Not disbelief. Something else. Something like recognition. One of the older Inuit hunters in the settlement stood quietly from his place near the stove, walked forward, and placed a hand on the leader's shoulder. You should rest, the old man said. You came back. That is enough. But as the leader lay back against the blankets, eyes heavy and unfocused, he whispered one last thing. A truth he wished he could forget. It let me go. Not because I escaped. Because it was done with us. And somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the lamps and the safety of human voices, a long, deep exhale moved through the night. Weeks passed. The leader healed slowly. The burns on his face, the frostbite on his hands, the nightmares that woke him long before dawn. People stopped asking questions. They accepted that some stories were not meant to be explained, and some places were not meant to be walked. But the old Inuit hunter visited him each day, bringing warm broth, silent company, and a kind of understanding that required no spoken words. One night, a storm drifted through the valley, brushing against the outpost walls with long, quiet breaths that reminded the leader far too much of the thing he had left behind. He could not sleep. So he rose from his cot, wrapped himself in a thick blanket, and walked to the window. Snow whirled across the empty plain outside, curling and drifting like pale ghosts searching for somewhere to rest. And there, far beyond the lanterns, far beyond the reach of human warmth, he saw it. A shape. Tall. Still. Watching. Not approaching. Not hunting. Simply waiting in the place where the storm was deepest, where the world turned white, and all distances blurred into a single aching void. The leader's breath caught. He blinked. The shape faded. The snow drifted on. The plain was empty once more. He let out a shaky exhale. And somewhere far off, as faint as memory, came another breath. Not wind. Not storm. A breath. Answering his. The old hunter appeared in the doorway behind him. "You see it?" he asked softly. The leader didn't look away from the window. "Sometimes," he whispered. "Only when I'm alone." The old man nodded. "That is when it walks." They stood together in the quiet. Snow swirling against the glass in slow, steady waves. "Will it ever stop?" the leader asked, voice barely audible. The old man shook his head once. "The Amarok does not follow men. It follows loneliness." A long silence passed between them. "Then why did it let me live?" The old hunter rested a hand on his shoulder. His answer was gentle and terrible and true. "Because it knows," he whispered, "that sooner or later you will walk alone again." And in the long quiet breath that followed, the leader understood that some hunters never finish the chase.